Uktul, there we go. Thank you that I don't have to project my voice. Okay, welcome back to the second session of the day. It's going to be very informative. I cannot wait to hear you, Miss Charity. You are touching on a topic that I'm very passionate about, so rest assured I'll be tuned in. Our session this afternoon is a panel session. So because I don't want us to waste time, I'm going to introduce all our speakers and I'm going to hand over to our facilitator, Ofazeka, who will take us through the session. The first session, we have Miss Charity Mukoni. Charity Mukoni was born in Soweto, Johannesburg, into a family of 4. In her early years, she grew up with her grandmother in Soweto and completed both primary and secondary schooling in Lenasia. Charity started her university career at Wits, holds a master's in clinical from Wits University. Upon completion of her master's, she went on to do internship at Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Academic Hospital and Chris Hani Baragwanath Academic Hospital, and a community service at Savour Tropical Disease Hospital. She then went on to work at the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls as a psychologist. Subsequent to the brief stay at the academy, she accepted the offer of a vice-chancellor's position at the associate lecturer at the University of Witwatersrand, where she is currently working as a lecturer and completing a PhD in the topic of father-daughter relationships. Charity currently runs a small private practice in Parktown North, Johannesburg, where she sees adults and couples for psychotherapy sessions. I think this is one of the things that we have really downplayed a lot as Black people, where we don't really seek help where necessary, especially in the mental health space. It's very important, and I'm very happy that you are here. And our second speaker, who will join us virtually, is Professor Elmarie Ketzinger. Professor Ketzinger will address the Convention on Cybersecurity Awareness, which is aimed at equipping all congregations with tools to navigate this digital era. She will discuss the precautions to be taken when online, as there are a myriad of scams and predators waiting to take advantage of unsuspecting victims. She will educate parents to be vigilant on their children's online habits and tools available to censor digital access, and also extend to issues of phishing, catfishing, and all types of scams. She has also been asked to cover issues of fake news and deep fake, to educate on how to distinguish between true and fake information. So relevant in this day. With COVID and all, there were so many messages that were coming out, and if you do not verify, you find that some of them were fake news. It is so relevant. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Over to you, Faz.
Tula, thank you. Thank you very much, Bulukeng. I humbly, let me start by greeting Bekubingelela Inglozi enkulu yakalibandla. Gibingelela umholi melusi. Gibingelela abaqotshwa, izikhonzikazi, amalunga, abafundikazi, and not forgetting the youth for whom or to whom this conference is dedicated. A very, very warm welcome to you. I'd also like to welcome all our viewers at home. I hope that you guys have been having an awesome time, an amazing time as we are. And if I may appropriate this opportunity and greet mom and dad. Mom and dad, hey, I love you. So without further ado, I'd like us to get into the panel discussion. But before we do so, I have an announcement, or rather a request. It's more of a request, and I'm just going to go out of this note to go into the next note. This is an opportunity where we are inviting everybody here in the audience and also at home. If you could just share some points of reflection from everything that you've heard from yesterday into today. So the platform that we are using for this is called Menti, and I believe as I speak that the details are being broadcast to the people at home as well as on the screen on the sides, where where you log on to a site called menti.com. There is a code that you will enter 2184674. It'll ask your name, surname, region, and you submit. It's very easy, very quick. And then there's a sentence for you to complete, and it starts, I believe, ... and you can fill in the rest. So to give an example, you can say, I believe God protected me and my family through COVID. I know that's a very generic example, but it's just to give you something to prompt you, and just share what feelings this conference has invoked for you, and we'll try and find a slot within the conference to just do a small playback on those. Without further ado, let's go back into our programming. So our esteemed guests have been profiled, and we've been told what they're going to speak to us. So we will start with Charity, who's sitting here with me, and then we'll cross over to Professor Kritzinger, who's waiting for us, and then after that we'll then do our discussion and Q&A. Thank you, Charity.
Thank you so much for having me. I think this is such a wonderful opportunity, and it's very rarely where I get to speak about mental health and psychology and just emotions in a spiritual or a church setting, because oftentimes I think it's something we really overlook. And there is something about this period of COVID-19 and this time where we were really forced to come face to face with our emotions, with our feelings, because it was a very difficult time. There was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things that we used to having or doing that we could no longer do. So what I'm going to share is hopefully going to be very brief, and it's just about feelings and emotions. Okay. So I know even as I say the word feelings or emotions, there are a lot of things that go on through people's minds. All right. So some of the things are probably, when I mention feelings, emotions, people think weakness. Some people think unnecessary. Some people think they cause trouble. There's a lot of things that can be viewed as negative about feelings and emotions. And what I'm going to share today is just going in to what it means for us as human beings, first and foremost, to have emotions and to have feelings, what the role of emotions and feelings play in our lives and what they tell us. Because I believe and I think that this is something that's quite important when you're speaking about things like mental health issues or just how we're doing as people and as human beings. And I think something else that's more important is that we need to look at ourselves, body, soul, and spirit, as well as emotions, as one. That you cannot enrich the other without being good or enriching the other part. Okay, so it's like a car that is moving. It moves on 4 wheels, and the wheels need to be properly aligned and balanced. If one of those tires or wheels are not in alignment or in balance, it causes a problem. You can get to your destination, but it will be dangerous. It won't be a very smooth journey. It just will be very difficult. Okay, so I'm just going to expand and speak about a term called emotional agility. So it's a term that was coined and pioneered. The person that came up with it is Dr. Susan Davids, a South African-born psychologist, but now teaches in Harvard and lives in the United States. And this is something about emotions that people don't usually talk about. Okay, and things that may feel quite unusual when you think about them. All right. So I think I'll start off by using an example that's familiar to all of us, an alarm clock. So we all set alarms in the morning on your phone, on an actual watch, for it to wake you up so that you start your day on time, that you can do the things that you need to do. You set an alarm so that you could get to this conference on time, you can get to work, to school on time. Okay. So the alarm clock, in and of itself, is not a bad thing. Okay, so I don't think anyone looks at an alarm clock or sees an alarm clock and think, oh, this thing is just so evil, it's so annoying, it's so irritating. Okay, but oftentimes when it goes off in the morning, particularly early morning for those who work, for those who go to school, it does feel like a bad thing. Okay, it feels annoying, it feels irritating, and there's so many things that you think about when you're still warm, particularly in the cold nights, a day like today. It becomes very difficult to get out of bed when that alarm clock goes. So the discomfort of getting up from your sleep, from your warm bed with the warm blankets, is there, whether you like it or not. Okay, it wakes you up from peaceful sleep, maybe from a wonderful dream where you had won the lotto and you were doing a few things, and then the alarm goes, and it does feel very uncomfortable, it brings about a lot of discomfort. Okay, so you have a choice, you have options. The one option, which I'm guilty of, is to snooze. Okay, so the alarm goes the first time, you say snooze. It goes off the next time, snooze. It goes off 3 times, snooze. What that does is that it just prolongs the discomfort that you're feeling and the discomfort that you're going through. All right. So if the alarm goes and the first time that it goes off, you just wake up and get on with your day. Yes, it still is uncomfortable. It still is not fun. It's not nice to do it, but you've done it. And instead of prolonging it by pressing snooze, snooze, snooze every 5 minutes, you've minimized the time that you could feel that discomfort of, why do I have to wake up? Why can't I just stay in bed? It's nice and warm here. Let everything be great. Okay. It's the same way with our emotions and our feelings as human beings. And I think as the person who was introducing was saying that it's especially for us as abantu abamnyama and black people. And I mean, I mentioned in my bio that I'm from Soweto, in a township where it's emotions and feelings are seen as a fancy thing, that if you feel emotions, let alone name them, that it's an unnecessary thing, it's a fancy thing, it's an add-on, it's a nice to have if you can even speak about them. And then there's also things about if you're a man, if you're a boy, boys don't cry. There's things that we know. Soldiers don't cry, boys don't cry. So there's a lot of things around how we treat emotions as things that are negative. So like that alarm clock, if you're feeling something, or there's an emotion or feeling that's surfacing, particularly feelings and emotions that we don't necessarily like to feel. Okay, so as people were singing and praising and worshiping, there was a feeling in it, a feeling of joy, a feeling of happiness. No one stopped themselves and said, oh no, I'm actually feeling this drum that's going and the song, and I'm gonna stop myself from feeling the joy. So as human beings, it's easier for us to be more comfortable with feelings of joy, feelings of happiness, but life does not always have those feelings for us. I'm sure if you've lived for any number of years, you'll know that there's feelings of pain, be it physical pain, be it emotional pain. As human beings, we are hardwired to have a range of all these feelings and emotions. And then what we often do, usually from what we taught, from what we know, from what we think is good for us, is that we suppress the very uncomfortable, or what we call, a lot of people often call, the negative feelings. Okay, and then you're told, just be happy, don't worry, be happy. There's even a song about it. And I know a lot of people would disagree and think, of course, that's a good thing, don't worry, be happy, forget about all the negative. And what we're often speaking about is the uncomfortable emotions, emotions that make us feel discomfort. And just coming back to this time of COVID and Corona, I think a lot of people have been through a lot of things. People have lost their loved ones, their jobs, money, everything that you knew, or the way that you knew life has changed. And of course, that will bring with it a lot of very uncomfortable feelings. Okay. And then what we try to do to feel good or to make ourselves feel better is suppress them. Okay, so push it down. You really are feeling very sad. You really are feeling very disappointed. You are feeling just a sense of betrayal, a sense of guilt, all the range of emotions that we might label as negative. And what we're always tempted to do is bury them. Okay, so those emotions are not good for us to feel. Particularly as Christians, you're told you can't be angry, you can't express feelings that are seen as negative. And doing that is like, I don't know if anyone has tried it, or maybe to try take a ball of any size and try immerse it underwater, either a bathtub of water or a swimming pool. It's not possible. So the more you're trying to hold that ball down, the more energy you're using, because all it wants to do is come up to the surface because of the force of the water and everything. And it's the same way with our emotions, that the more you try to hold it down, the more you try to suppress it, the more things try to happen. What that does is it takes away energy, it takes away some of the things that you need to keep physically healthy, some of the things that you need to keep mentally healthy. And it uses all those resources to do something that actually is impossible and should not be done. And what emotions and feelings do, and I'm getting to this part, is that they do not define you. They are like a red flag. Okay, so it's something that shows you that, okay, something is not okay. Something is not as it should be. But what we often do, particularly when we try and suppress emotions and keep them down, is that we see that particular emotion as being you. So oftentimes people will say things like, I am such a sad person. I am such an angry person. Okay, so you see sadness and anger are just emotions. There's no such thing as a sad person. There is a person who feels sad. There's a person who feels angry. And how we often get it very twisted, and sometimes how we feel very scared of emotions that feel uncomfortable, is because we take on those emotions as being us, that you see yourself. And I often have heard, even from my clients that I see, oftentimes they'll say, I am such a depressed person. And I often say, it's not that you are a depressed person, you are a person who's experiencing feelings of depression. So with that, as I conclude, I'm just going to go through something that you can remember. Okay, so 4 things that help you go through the stages, 4 stages of what this professor has called emotional agility, or even emotional resilience. Okay, so emotional resilience is not about not feeling uncomfortable emotions. Emotional resilience is not about pursuing happiness all the time and always being happy, but I'll go through what she called, it's the NASA, so NASA. Okay, if you think about planets and space and all those things, NASA. The first N stands for naming your feelings. Okay. So you need to take note of whatever feeling or emotion that you're trying to suppress. So oftentimes when we go through things, particularly things that are uncomfortable, things that we do not plan for, things that we don't really like happening. Okay, so like COVID, no one likes that we have to wear masks all the time. No one likes that we've had to cancel all our plans for the past 3-4 months. So there's a lot of uncomfortable feelings that will surface with that. And it's very important to know what that feeling is. Okay, so how you can do this, how you can go about naming your feelings, is doing simple things like sitting in silence. Because what we often do when feelings of discomfort come up, we want to distract ourselves. Some people will read, some people will, there are positive distractions at certain times, but some people go to negative distractions, such as using substances, doing things that are not helpful for them. But there can be equally acceptable things that we use to distract ourselves. Some people use the gym, and we think people who go to the gym are great and healthy, and there's nothing wrong in and of itself for going to the gym, but it's often important, particularly when you're feeling feelings of discomfort, to see whether or not you're using that as a distraction from being able to feel those emotions. Perhaps not even that step of feeling them yet, but naming what they are. Okay. And it could be things like journaling, writing things down about your day, about your experiences that you're having. It could be something like verbalizing it, praying, speaking to yourself about it, anything that can help you to name what the experience is and what the possible feeling could be from that uncomfortable experience. The next one is the A, which means to accept it. Okay. So after you try to find out or name or label what the emotion or the feeling is, you need to accept it. Okay. And like I mentioned, oftentimes people will say things like, oh, I am so lonely. I am such a lonely person. And maybe, yes, it could be loneliness, but sometimes when you go through the feelings and when you allow yourself to think about the feelings and feel them, you'll actually realize that maybe you're just bored. What you need is a hobby, and it's not maybe loneliness per se. So when you accept what the emotion is, especially for very difficult feelings of sadness, of grief, of loss, it's not to try and push it down. It's not to try and force yourself to feel an opposite emotion to what the experience is, but being able to name it and accept it. And how you do that is about specifying the emotion. Okay, so oftentimes, and this happens a lot with loss, which is something that we're facing at this point in time, people will just describe just feeling stressed, and that's what we always get, that you don't know what word to use, and people will say, I've just been so stressed lately. Okay, so that's just a broad experience of a lot of feelings. If you're stressed, you could feel agitated, you could feel physically sick, you could have a headache, there's a lot of things. But when you try and accept the feeling or the emotion that it is, then you'll think about some of the circumstances. If you've lost, say, your employment, or you've been disappointed, there's an opportunity that you lost, that feeling comes because of loss. And that feeling could be grief instead of just sadness or stress. And once you've accepted and named that emotion, then it helps you to step out of it. And then that leads me to stage number 3, which is stepping out of the emotion. And this is quite the important one. And when I speak about stepping out, what people think, again, is that stop feeling sad. And we often say, I mean, even when I was growing up, the thing that my mother would say is, you don't come out without a smile on your face. Okay, stop feeling sad, stop crying. Even in places where it's actually appropriate. And when you try, think of that ball example and trying to hold down a ball underwater. The more you try and do that, the more difficult it becomes and the more energy you try to use. And once you've named the feeling, once you've accepted it, it becomes a lot more manageable to be able to step out of it and see yourself separate from that sadness, that you're not a sad person. You are a person who is going through a sad moment, who's going through a sad period, who's going through a sad time. And then you're able to step out of that emotion, and whatever emotion doesn't become you. Okay, so that's the third and most important step. And you do this by acknowledging the feeling, speaking to it, speaking about it. So experiencing the full length of what it is. That I feel very disappointed, actually. I'm not just stressed, but I feel disappointed. I feel betrayed. I feel like something is an injustice. I feel fearful about the future. And that does not mean to say that it changes what you value or it changes what you believe, but it's just about an honesty and something that is very important for just your mental health and being able to be aware of yourself. And then the fourth one is being able, the fourth A is acting, or the second A, acting according to your values. So when you think about your emotions and your feelings, a lot of people often say, don't make decisions based on your emotions. Don't act emotionally. Women are often accused of being very emotional. They're not trusted as leaders or doing things because they're quite emotional. And that is something that is a misconception, because if your feelings and your emotions particularly are not acknowledged, then you do get into a space where you are the emotion or you are the feeling. But it's important when you have emotional agility that you can separate yourself from an emotion, that there is no emotion that's positive or negative. It just is. So joy is just joy. Happiness is just happiness. We never judge happiness and say, stop being too happy. It just seems like you're happy all the time. We always see it as something that's great. It's the more uncomfortable feelings that we put judgment on and we put value on it, that sadness is bad, being angry is not right. And of course, when that happens, we often are equating actions to emotions, but those are two different things. That once you've followed this stage of accepting your emotions, naming them, stepping out of them, then you're able to think then about yourself, about your values, and you can make the decisions based on your values. So for instance, let's say you're very hungry and you're taking public transport, taking a taxi, and you're just really, really hungry. And then there's something that you can buy. There's a McDonald's nearby by the taxi rank. You can make a decision to go there, buy whatever meal, and satisfy that feeling of hunger. Or you can think to yourself, because your value is eating healthy food, that although you are feeling hunger, it doesn't help to ignore it and say, no, I'm not hungry, because if you're hungry, you are. But because of the value of eating healthy meals, of eating at home, of saving money, whatever your value is, you are able to say, okay, one more taxi ride and then I'll get home and then I'll eat. Although I'm very hungry right now, I value this more than I do satisfying this hunger or satisfying this emotion and feeling. And the fourth step then is then to act out of whatever it is that you value. If you value family and you realize that you are under extreme pressure and you're working too much, it's to think about some of the decisions that you can make, even if you feel very fearful of, say, your boss, or you feel fearful of not doing well or fearful of failure. You accept that, acknowledge that. I fear that I might fail. So what I'm acting in is out of fear. So you're acting out of the emotion and you're forgetting about the things that you value, that you'll start seeing your family less and less because it's the emotion that you're acting out of as opposed to the things that you value. But this step does not come until you've accepted what it is that you're feeling, until you've named the feeling and actually realized for yourself what it is that you're feeling, and also being able to step out of it. So with that is to say that there's a lot of things that people think about mental health. There's a lot of stigma that people think if you're seeing a psychologist especially, then uyahlanya, there's something wrong with you, it's something that's bad. If you are on medication for depression or psychiatry, it means there's a weakness about you. How can you be so weak to not deal with things by yourself? And I think it's those little things that are informed by what we don't understand about emotions. And emotions are a God-given gift. That when He created us with eyes, with ears, with internal organs, and they all have their functions, emotions also have their function in terms of making sure that our mental health, our emotional well-being is taken care of. And as much as we read up on diets and read up on exercise regimes and things to try and find out more and know more about how to keep our physical bodies healthy, it's also very important to do the same with our emotions to ensure that our mental health is in check and that we can always check in with ourselves about how we're doing and to be honest about it. Because being honest about it does not mean that you're weak. It does not mean that there's something wrong with you, but it just means that you're able to acknowledge the experience, acknowledge the circumstance, and recognize that in as much as life has joy, life has happiness, life also has suffering, life has sadness, life has a lot of things, and all these emotions are the same thing. They come from the same well. And to try and block the one, you inadvertently also blocking the other. So if you try and block and suppress sadness and fear and all the emotions that you see as negative, in a way you're also closing and blocking yourself from experiencing wonderful emotions such as joy and laughter and love. So with that, on that note, I'll leave it there. That's what you need to know about emotional agility. So think NASA, N-A-S-A, name your feelings, accept them, step out of them, and act according to your values. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charity. That was most informative. I'd just like to link it. I know that you probably joined us a little bit later this morning. I'm linking it to a comment that His Grace made a little bit earlier, where he was saying that some people, their social media presence is about covering up what is not going well in my life and only exposing all the good things. So I like what you're saying about the NASA. It's about, like you're saying, I'm just going to reiterate again. Name the feeling, accept it, step out of the emotion, act according to your values. Because some of these things that we're seeing on social media where people are exposing their bodies and all of that, it's sometimes acting out of a place because maybe they're actually struggling with emotional, and emotions as you've stated. So before we go over to Professor Kritzinger, just one question. Is you mentioned just now to say that just like we look for diets and we go to the gym and we want to keep ourselves healthy, and also from a church or spiritual perspective, we have check-ins, we fast, we pray. So what does an emotional check-in look like? Thank you.
So with an emotional check-in, it could be things like writing down in a journal starting simply. It's not everyone who's able to do it. Some people really find it hard to write things down. But how your day was. So taking, even if it's 10 minutes, either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, to check in. I think it's better done at the end of the day, just reviewing the things that you've been through, because usually we just be on autopilot. And then you go to work, you come back, you do this, you do that, and then you never really take time to check in on how the different experiences that you've had during the day have affected you. So things like writing down, things like journaling, things like keeping in contact with close friends, people that you trust, and being honest. I think that's another thing. With social media, what it does, it breeds a lot of discontent, and it breeds a lot of comparison as well, because what people post on there, or even the dishonesty, and it's not dishonesty to other people, but dishonesty to yourself, then causes you to compare yourself to other people, and that's what we normally do. If someone's always posting wonderful, great things on Instagram, then we feel like there's a lot of things that are wrong with us. But I think the first one is about honesty to yourself before anyone else.
Thank you, Charity. With that, I'd like us to cross over to Professor Elmarie Kritzinger. I believe she is ready for us. And we're just...
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Professor.
I just want to confirm, can you hear me and can you see my slides?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, and we can see your slides. Thank you, Professor. How are you today?
Fantastic. Thank you for inviting me to this wonderful event that I can speak on technology. The previous speaker said it so nicely. She talked about coming face to face with emotions and feelings. And that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is coming face to face with technology. And that's why I can speak to you today, being many miles away via technology. And especially in this time we had this year with COVID-19, many people working from home, many school learners had to do online classrooms and teaching and learning. We saw the impact of technology in our everyday lives. Many of you that is probably sitting there in the congregation today have cell phones. And just think about it. Think about your cell phone. Maybe it's in your handbag, maybe it's in your pocket, maybe you're looking at it currently. But just think about it for one moment. The cell phone you have currently today, no matter what the model is, that cell phone has got more computer power that they used in the whole of World War II, or more computer power that they used to put somebody on the moon. So the cell phone we have today, and not only cell phones, all our technology devices today has grown over the last few years. And in this presentation, we're going to have a little bit a look at how technology evolved and how are we as people interact with these technologies, and where are we going as a society within Africa. Over the last few years, everything has changed about technology. Just think about what technology was available when we were younger, how it changed, and how technology will look for our children and our grandchildren. The way televisions has improved, the way we communicate via mobile phones, the way we type, the way we work, the way we teach our children has evolved through many years. Little bit of a background. They say we're currently in the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution was in the 1800s. So there was the development of steam engines and factories that created textiles. And in the late 1800s, we started moving over into the second industrial revolution, which is mass production, industries, oil, the invention of electricity, light bulbs, and even the telephone. In the 1970s around, we went into the third industrial revolution, which is a digital technology approach. That's all the gadgets we see out there today. Maybe you have one, maybe you have many, maybe you're avoiding it, maybe that's part of your life. And we'll talk about that as we go on. So what is this fourth industrial revolution? The fourth industrial revolution was first mentioned in Davos by Professor Schaub, and he said it is the fusion of technology. And the lines between technology, between the physical and the digital and the biological spheres are going away. So it is not even the way we do things, it is changing the way who we are, how we interact with other people, and how we act with the internet or cyberspace. This professor said the world is not prepared. As a South Africa, we are also not prepared. They speculate in the next 10 or 20 years, more than 80% of jobs have not been created yet. Our children will do jobs that we can't even imagine now. So how do we prepare ourselves and our children for this world to come? Technology has grown at a very alarming rate in the last few years. If you just look at the timeline from the 1400s, basically in the 1400s, the coin technology started, and the printing press was invented. It took 200 years before the telescope was invented. Still 100 and so odd years later, the steam engine, the telephone, and the car. So that was quite a very flat growing of technology. But after that, we see an accelerated J-curve growth of technology. First came the word processor, then the World Wide Web, or cyberspace as we call it, DVDs, Google, Facebook, and we're going to talk a little about of all the new technologies, for instance, 3D movies, 3D printing, and so on. So technology has changed quite a lot over the last few years. Let's just put it in perspective for us. It took 75 years for the telephone to get 100 million users. 75 years. Instagram took only 2 years to get exactly the same number of users. And Pokemon Go, our online game for children, a lot of adults play it as well, only 1 month, and they got 100 million users. People today on Facebook and on Twitter and all those, it's got millions of followers instantly within a day, within a matter of hours. So we are not prepared for what is coming our way. This fourth industrial revolution, it's got a lot of new terms that we don't understand, but we must prepare for that because that is where we're going. Robotics, artificial intelligence, think about nanotechnology, a lot of information in news about 5G that's going around, 3D printing. There was an article that they started printing hamburgers with 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, virtual reality, and the list goes on. So there's a lot of new terms, a lot of new areas going open when we think about technology. Just think, within 1 minute, all of this that you see can happen. 19 million texts are sent. 1.5 million log-ons onto Facebook. 4.1 million searches on Google, and that list goes on. People is interacting more with technology. And this is escalated within this lockdown period we have when many people had only technology to speak to. So even this year, we saw people is acting more on platforms, social media sites, interacting. So people is using technology more. Technology in itself is not good nor bad. Technology is quite neutral. So it's the way we use technology that we have to look at. So a knife in itself is not good or bad. If I use the knife for good, to cut fruit, then it's a good thing. If we use it to kill somebody, it's a bad thing. So technology is not good nor bad. It's the way we use it. And this is what this talk is about. How are we using technology? If you've got children, how are you teaching your children to use technology? Because us and our children, within a few years, will be surrounded by technology. The advantages of technology, better healthcare, new business models, working from home, kids learning education online. So a lot of advantages. You can have long list of advantages of technology, but however, with everything good, there is something bad attached to it. A shortage of skills, losing rights, losing loss of life, cybercrime. South Africa is currently on the list of the third highest country in the world regarding cybercrime. And maybe one of you sitting here today have been a victim of cybercrime, identity theft, bullying. So the list is long to say what can possibly go wrong. We all know about the 3 dimensions, and a lot of people say the 4th dimension is time, and then the smart people say the 5th dimension is cyberspace. So what is cyberspace? Well, cyberspace is virtual. It is a lot of computers that's connected all over the globe. So it's a lot of computers speaking to one another via a network, and then us as the users interact with this virtual environment. It's borderless. It's not in any borders. It's all over the globe. And that's very difficult to control if you look at different policies and procedures when you are in cyberspace. And we call this the Internet of Things. They say over 40% of the world's population is connected to cyberspace, a lot of billion users. And by this year, more than 50 digital devices will be connected to the internet. In 2013 already, they started hacking. And the first implement that they used was a fridge. So hackers are very smart, and they're out to get our information, because information these days is very valuable to the right people. So when you are connected to the internet, or you're teaching your children regarding cyberspace, think about cybersecurity, thinking about cyber ethics, cyber crime, and the Internet of People that we will talk about just now. So the internet is growing fast. Technology is growing faster. Think about planet hacking, material hacking, biohacking. Very strange terms for us because it's something new. But I think our children, maybe even us, will work in one of these environments very soon. If you've looked at any of these movies, it's very old movies, but yet in them, they already indicated things that was at that time not available and not really actually that you can think about. But many of these things already came true to some extent. Identity theft, smart watches, self-drive cars, pacemakers that can work via Wi-Fi. So many things can happen. So what can possibly go wrong? There are many things that can go wrong, but we have to remember, as users of the technology, there is no reset button. If it's once there, we cannot take it back. And as users of the technology, we must remember, we are the weakest link. We are the ones using technology, and if something goes wrong, we are the ones that are going to be the victims. Password protection, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Your devices, phishing attacks, how people get your information. How do you fall for scams? Firstly, I tell people, if you get an email to say you have won R1 million, you haven't. It is a scam. And that's why how people get your information, they try that you trust them, and then they try to get your money, your identity, something like that. So the one thing that we must talk about is you as user, or your children as users, have a digital footprint. This digital footprint is forever. It cannot be deleted. It cannot be taken down. Any text you send, any photograph you send, anything you do, no matter on what you click, no matter what you watch, that is stored somewhere in this cyberspace, and you can never delete it. If you say something hurtful to somebody or post a picture that you should not post, you cannot take it down. It is out there. If you press send, everybody can get access to that. Nothing is actually anonymous on the World Wide Web, and then it's there forever. You cannot delete it. If you post something in 10 years' time, if you want to go to a job interview, that person interviewing you can go and look at your social media accounts. They can see what you posted, and then they can use that when they make a decision if they hire you or not. So it's very important that we must realize we've got a digital footprint, and we must protect this footprint the best to our abilities, because we cannot delete something. We're looking about cyber ethics, security, and cyber safety. Very shortly, what does these terms mean? Firstly, cyber security. That is basically, how do we protect the hardware and the software? How do we protect, if we've got a desktop, what is the firewalls on there? If you've got a mobile phone, what is the antivirus protection on that? What is your password? Is your password 12345? Is your password your name, your birthday? That can be cracked in a matter of seconds. So we must be very sure that if we have digital devices, no matter the make, it can be cracked, and we must be very sure we protect our devices. Cyber safety is protecting ourselves from predators, stalkers, identity theft, phishing, cyberbullying, and watching inappropriate material online. So we must make sure that we are safe when we are within the in cyberspace. And then cyber ethics. A lot of people forget about this. What is cyber ethics? Cyber ethics is the way you're going to act within cyberspace. Many times we see that people act differently in real life as they would in cyberspace, and that's actually wrong. We must be the same people in real life and in cyberspace. So in real life, maybe we don't steal because that's against our morals and our values. So a lot of people go on to cyberspace and then they steal because they see this is a disconnected space that they can do that. And it's very important to understand ourselves and to teach our children the way we are in real life, that morals and values must be taken into cyberspace as well. Plagiarism. At the university I work in, you see that. And that's university students plagiarize. So not necessarily is that their morals and values, but as soon as they're on cyberspace, it changes. And we must be very wary on that as well. We must also understand some of us is digital natives and some of us is digital immigrants. Digital natives is the younger generation. They've been born into technology. They understand the technology, and maybe us that's a little bit older, we are digital immigrants. We must learn. We learn slower. We do not understand the technology. It's difficult for us to get in that cyberspace, but we must know the rules. We must know how to protect ourselves. And if we have children, we must make sure that they know this as well. So what is the warnings of technology? Internet addiction is classified as an addiction. Gaming, very, very much. So we must understand that when we use cyberspace, we must go and look through that list, and that list can get a lot longer to make sure are we healthy? Do we have a healthy cyber ethical lifestyle? Looking at inappropriate content, a lot of the youth we see today, we've got a problem looking at inappropriate content, especially a lot more kids, a lot more adults got access to free Wi-Fi, cheap Wi-Fi, and that, of course, human nature, that's the first thing many of our youth go to. But all of us must be really vigilant when we've got kids or even ourselves to not go to these sites, because that's really harmful to our physical, emotional well-being. FOMO, fear of missing out. Are you one of those people that cannot put a phone down, must always read emails, must always be on social media platforms? That is detrimental to our health, and we'll get there as well. Gaming. A lot of youngsters these days play games to any hours in the morning, especially these days when they are working, are schooling from home, and parents need to work. We're sitting behind a computer or going to work from 7 to 7. What do the kids do? They go online and they play games. Health issues. We see more and more people not sleeping enough. That's getting social anxiety, and that's being bullied online. So health issues is a critical thing we must start addressing. The number of youngsters that is committing suicide is increasing because of this social anxiety they have in cyberspace, emotional issues. A lot of teenagers and young people that got internet addictions, you can see in the emotional issues. You can see when something is going wrong. People are spending too much time in the internet. They're not getting exercise. They're not getting the healthy food, as was mentioned. And then they start doing strange things. As we said, is copyright and plagiarism that is against the law. It's against any moral code, and yet people do it. And there's a replacement of reality, making a new life online. A lot of software out there, the Second Life, one of them, to have a whole different life online. That's escaping from one life to another one in a cyber world that is not real. So we must make very sure when we use technology that that we use technology, and technology is not using us. When we look at parents, I plead today, make sure you understand the devices you give to your children. Be alert, be active, be involved. Make sure you understand what your kids are up to. Have a look on their phones. Who are they SMSing? How are they interacting with other people? What are they watching? What sites are they watching? Be involved in this technology environment. Even if you don't understand it many times, be involved. Have an open discussion with the youngsters. If you've got devices, there's a lot of controls. There's a lot of parental guide software you can get. Some you have to pay, some is for free, some is better, some is worse. So there's a lot of controls that you can put on your devices. If you've got on social media, if you have a Facebook account, a lot of privacy settings you can change. So you can secure these devices that you have. But very important, I mentioned the Internet of People, the people settings. Just take a minute and think as I go through the list. What is your ethical morals? Are you transferring that morals into cyberspace? How much time are you spending on your devices? It's easier to look something on your device than to go out exercising, to go and do what you're supposed to do. So people get lost in this ICT environment. Do it have an impact on your family and friends, the social connection? Your emotional connection, is it draining? Do you just want to have your devices and look at your devices? Does it have an impact on your work environment or an impact on your living environment? So it's very important when I come to my end of my slides is technology is around us. We cannot say it's good nor bad. It's the way we use it, and we must make sure we use technology correctly, because a lot of things can go wrong if we misuse technology. If you've got kids, make sure that you have that open discussion for your kids of how do they use technology, that you don't get the youngster or even yourself getting depressed because you're disconnected, you're being bullied, and that is a very hard thing to recover from. Especially if you've got internet addiction, to recover. Thank you very much for giving me this time, this opportunity to talk to me about this topic of technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kritzinger. Professor, can you hear me? Oh, awesome. Thank you very much for the topic and how you've introduced it. you know, you've said so much. There's so many elements that I want to ask you about, and I guess we don't have time to talk about all of them, but I'm going to just touch on a few things. So I love how you, towards the end, you actually linked very nicely of why we're having these two topics of emotional agility and cyber awareness together, because you talked on that, or you touched on the points to say when you're not feeling good about yourself, you know, you may be using the technology as a replacement for emotions or to hide emotions, thereby finding yourself going into a dark, deep hole where you've put stuff on the internet which you can't take down, and like you say, it probably goes against, sometimes it goes against your morals and all of that. So on that point, so, and I don't know how much you can share on this, and it's perhaps a discussion we can have another day, but from a spiritual and a Christian's perspective point of view, and I know some of the things that you touched on are very much things like identity theft, phishing, vishing. But even spiritually, we can be fished and vished. For example, there are lots of cults that are also on the internet looking for people, trying to take advantage of people that are looking for answers, right? There's lots of different religions in the world, and somebody could be in a bad space and they click on something, and next thing they are on a flight to somewhere else. So perhaps, Professor, what are the kind of things that you've perhaps come across, or some of the pointers you can give us around some of the things where people get hooked on because of they were perhaps not in a good space? Thank you.
100%, and we saw this from all the people I've spoken this year. We saw this happening more this year. I think a lot of people this year was not in a good space for many reasons. It could be you lost your job, so you lost somebody to COVID, your kids, you don't know what to do with your kids. So any of those things, it's bad spaces. And many times when you go onto the internet, you will find something that will make you feel better. But that thing that's going to make you feel better is not necessarily real. It's not necessarily going to solve your problem. For instance, if you lost your job and you've got money issues and you get an email that says, "Dear Mr. So-and-so, wonderful news. The government is, I'm going to give you a grant of 10,000 Rand because of the COVID. Just click on this link." And when you click on the link, they ask you to put in your banking details. You put it in, but that is a phishing scam. That is people that wants to get your information. So sometimes when we are in bad situations, we do things because we're desperate to make it better, but that usually don't work. So when we're in the internet, we must be very vigilant is where we click, what we watch. The other one that I spoke to a young girl that posted a nude photo of herself, and the person that had it then blackmailed her. And she got very, very depressed. And luckily, her parents got to her before she committed suicide, because that was in her plans. So people is grabbing at straws these days, and that can lead us to very dark places. So my advice is, when you look at the technology environment, is don't click on anything you distrust. Don't click on anything that looks a little bit off. You haven't won anything. Verify. If you get the email that the government wants to give you money, there must be at least a telephone number or an email. Send the email, phone them, and verify that. Do not give your personal information to anybody on the internet. Verify before you give personal information, banking details, because information like that is how criminals make money. So verify, be vigilant, and teach the children exactly that. Be aware, be very aware before you click on anything. And the other thing I want to touch on is what you said is our morals and our values. We have to stick to that. And in cyberspace, it's very difficult because it's easy to get to pornography. It's easy to plagiarize, to get through a test in the university environment. But we have to stick to our morals and our values, especially in a space like cyberspace, because once we do not do that, then it's a spiraling out of control, because you did it once. The second time is easier. Nobody's watching you. So we must make very sure that when we have beliefs, when we've got morals, we stick to that in the digital in space as well.
Thank you, Professor. And while we are queuing the mics for question and answer, let me just come back to Charity. I think Professor said a mouthful. Perhaps you can just lean into some of the few things that you mentioned, because I saw there were some good links between how I'm feeling and perhaps how I'm using technology to sort of mask my feelings. Thanks.
I mean, there was an example that she gave of someone who put out nudes on the internet, and then that spoiled a lot of things. I think that happens. That is something of a perfect example of what happens when emotions are displaced or not being dealt with, that there's a lot of things that we do to try and make ourselves feel better. And I think that is the link, that we often resist all the time facing reality and the reality of things, that a lot of things that are on the internet or in cyberspace are a pseudo, so a fake kind of reality, a reality that we have control over, a reality that we can create for ourselves. And I think that can link to something of trying to escape our emotions, of escaping how we feel, of escaping the reality and experiences that we're currently facing. And I think it's such a perfect example that the professor gave of how one thing can spiral out of control and lead to another, and then really lead us into a sticky situation, all because there was something very unpleasant, uncomfortable happening in the moment, and we rushed to doing something to really ridding ourselves of this very uncomfortable emotion. So perhaps using this example of the nudes online, it's something that happens very often, is that perhaps you felt disappointed by something, perhaps it's a self-esteem issue where you don't feel great about yourself, and instead of being honest to yourself about that, finding help for it, finding someone to speak to, and identifying that, you do something to try and avoid that emotion, to try and not feel it. And I think, as we've seen in a very practical light, particularly with the internet and with cyberspace, a lot of those things can spiral out of control.
Thank you very much, Charity. We've got a lot of questions coming through, and I know we are going to get questions from our audience here, but our viewers at home have some questions which we're going to cross over to. We're going to first cross over to Durban Central. I'm looking at our engineering team. Okay, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties. I know we have queued a mic, so while we... Oh, okay, seems like we're good. Okay, thank you. Durban Central, welcome. Again. Team, shall I give them another minute or two? Okay, I think let's cross to questions on the floor. Do we have a question? Either for Professor Kretzinger? Yes, I see there's a question. Please, can we get a mic this side? Thank you very much.
Hello. Just want to ask the question in relation with cybersecurity, more on the topic of fake news. We have become more tech savvy, and one thing I think the professor touched on, scams that will say you have won R1 million, but then even people who do such scams have become more tech savvy, and certain news you may see pop up, it seems very real, and you may not, when you see R1 million, then you think, okay, maybe not, but then the much newer things you may not be able to see. So are there any tips to identifying what is real or what is fake news?
Thank you for the question, Savour. Just checking, Professor Kretzinger. Professor?
Sorry. We as cyber users must be very clear on the internet. The internet is a reality of the person on the internet. So there's a lot of fake news. We saw this in this whole thing of COVID, a lot of fake news. So we must make very sure is when we read something, verify what you've read. Before you forward it, verify that. Before you say this is the truth, you need to verify. So do not only read one site, read many sites. Speak to people. So you as cyber user must develop that skill to find out what I'm reading, what I'm watching, is that fake or reality. Always go in that it is fake. And then when you verify it, then you can trust it. The second question is some tips to make sure that we don't become cyber victims. 1, never give any personal information to anybody. Make sure who do you want to give this to? What do they want to do it with? No bank, no institution will ask a password of you, will ask you to log in outside the environment that they created and is secure. For instance, if you bank with ABSA's got a secure banking environment. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll have a little lock, so you know that's a safe space. There you can connect, put in your details, and do internet banking. If ABSA, for instance, or any bank will never ask personal information, will ask passwords, will ask you to do anything outside the environment. So we must be very vigilant, never to give our information. If somebody asks us, make sure what do they want this information to, and never give your password, your credit card details, your CVV number, nothing. Don't give it to people before you're absolutely sure they are authentic. Otherwise, it is a scam.
Thank you very much, Professor. It looks like, I'm sorry, team, I'm looking at my cell phone and I know it looks very unprofessional. It's just the only way at this stage that we can communicate with the team. So I've got 2 areas here. I've got Durban Central, Durban West. Who are we crossing over to, please?
I don't know. They will tell us. It's too late. It's okay.
What is going on with no bank, no institution will ask password. Will ask you to log in.
I see we've got background noise. I think let's stick on the questions here until we can just maybe they need to go into an area that's a little bit quiet. We won't be able to get that question. Perhaps they can text it to us and we can answer it from there. Are there any other questions from the floor? Oh, we've got hands. Okay, I'm going to say, let me give Dumi an opportunity, as we had one from the gents just now. We'll come to Mpulukeng. I noted your hand, and Skoliwe, thanks.
Tula, just a question to the professor and Ms. Charity. From a cyberspace, what are the practical ways of dealing with cyberbullying in terms of, because I think we have a culture, we've developed a culture of cyberbullying being in a humorous way. So practical steps of identifying that you're being cyberbullied and then also applying the NASA tips that Ms. Charity shared, and then beyond that, after that NASA application, in terms of relaying that with somebody else who may possibly help you in terms of when you realize that you've been victimized in the cyberspace. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with Charity, then we'll go back to Professor Kritzinger. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think it is quite a big phenomena that people spend a lot of time on social media and in the cyberspace, and that becomes, I think, like the professor was saying, and I'm sure she'll be able to say this much better than I, becomes a reality for certain people. So it is very important, first of all, to understand that I think something very important that the professor has said of maintaining the same identity or being the same person, whether in person or on the cyberspace. So that's the first thing. And I think in terms of being able to identify or seeing cyberbullying, to think about it in the real life, because I think when people have TWAs, like Twitter wars and things like that, it's seen as something that's a lot more casual, a lot more funny, a lot more entertaining. But imagine that in a real social life situation, because I think there is something quite unhealthy and something that's not based in reality about treating the social media space as though it's something that's separate from reality. So if something would be offensive, something that wouldn't be right for someone to say in a social setting when you're sitting around having a braai or sitting around and the person says it to your face, then it is something that would definitely be akin to cyber, I mean, it's called cyberbullying now, but I think there is something that's very important in thinking about having congruence in something that's on the cyberspace as well as real life, and not to separate cyberspace, particularly social media, from real life and what the reality of your life is. Firstly, just to maintain your own sanity, because some people go to an extent of creating a persona or a personality on social media that they end up believing, even though it's not based on reality.
Good, Charity. Professor Kritzinger, would you like to respond to that
Thank
question?
you very much. Everything the previous speakers really 100%. I want just to add to that. The first thing is we must know ourselves. We must know ourselves, who we are, what do we believe, and we must be happy with ourselves. We must be happy with our ears and our noses. We must be happy with our weight. We must be happy with ourselves. And if we have that, if we go into the cyberspace and something like that occurs, we must be able to say, I don't believe you. That is fake news. And I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to walk away. So the first thing I usually tell people is walk away. If you don't believe it, walk away from that. Make sure you have got a circle of trust. It can be your parents, it can be a very good friend, it can be a pastor, it can be somebody you trust. So if somebody tell you you're ugly, go and speak to your circle of friends, your circle of people you trust to find out, is this fake news or not? So first, block a person if it's somebody you don't know, if it's on a social media page, a friend of a friend, you can block them. So make sure when you use social media platforms, how do you block people? Set up settings that you only allow friends, positive friends that will have a positive impact on your environment. But yet, some of us, or most of us sometimes, got a problem with some part of ourselves. And if somebody bullies us, then, and you can't block it, it happens concurrently, it happens a lot. Tell somebody, tell a parent if you're a kid, tell somebody that will help you through this. If it becomes cyberbullying, which is against the law, go to your police, go and make a case against these people. If you see it's really getting out of control, keep the evidence that you can show something. This is what happening is. Limit yourself to the exposure of social media sites. So if you know people on Facebook is not very nice, don't go there. Find another place. So we must step away from places that has impact, a negative impact in our environment. So we must be very sure is that when we're on any social media platform, it is to go and enhance us, to help us, to make us grow better people. And if it does not do that, step away. Get out of that and go and find a place that can be that for you. But I also just need to ask is, a lot of people say, I'm being cyberbullied, and that is growing. But we must ask, a lot of times we see that children and grown are the bullies as well. So we must go and have introspection. Are we maybe the bullies? Or we may be saying things to hurt other people? So my rule is, no matter if you're a child, grown up, never do to others that you don't want others to do to you. And if you do that, you will know when to get out of that social media platform. Go to your inner circle and they will tell you the truth.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I love what you said just now around we also need to check ourselves. At this stage, we're talking about people who could be victims, but are we actually, or could we be perpetrators? And that's perhaps something for us to ponder on. So it looks like Durban Central is ready for us, crossing over. Tula, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
How are you guys doing there? Are you guys having fun?
We are. It's
Awesome.
as much as we be there with you, but we just have to make do with what we have.
Yes, lovely. Yes, you may go ahead with your question or your questions.
Referring to Ma'am's beginning of formal, isn't formal a way of creating social advocacy of many issues that ail society and social awareness of what is going on around us and how to create concrete solutions? No. Okay. So, isn't FOMO a way of creating social advocacy of many issues that ail society, but as well creating social awareness of what is going around us while creating concrete solutions?
I'm going to check if that was clear enough for Professor Kritzinger. I imagine that that question is for her, so that I can perhaps repeat the question.
That's all the questions for me. Okay.
Perhaps
so the second question is,
okay.
How is having a digital footprint a bad thing in terms of archives? Won't that give future generations accessibility to information on such important years such as 2020? Or would the inevitable updating cancel this so-called advantage? The third question, would you like to ask the third question?
On passwords, how safe is it to save your password on your device? Example, when you put your password, say on Facebook or Instagram, and your device asks you if you would like to save the details on.
Sounds like we are getting cut off. Team, if I may request, I think the crossing over is not working as effectively as we would like. So if we could please be content with texting out questions through. Mr. Mabaso, if I may please ask that you facilitate that, and I'll check my feeds for your questions. And I may not do justice to the questions that were posed just now. I tried to get some of them, but I didn't get them very well, but I'll try my best. These were, I think, specifically to you, Professor Kritzinger. The first one, from what I could get, was around FOMO. So the question was, isn't FOMO creating some kind of social advocacy? So to want to keep people informed of what's going on around, so that, you know, people are not not living where they're not aware of what's going on. That was the first thing. And then the second thing, I think, if I understood the question correctly, is that if we advocate for limiting the amount that we post on social media and everywhere else, are we not limiting archives for future generations? So to perhaps for future generations 20 years from now who did not live through COVID, to perhaps give them a view of what we were going through. So I think those are the questions that I understood. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Yes, and I think the third question about the password, I think I got it, but let's see. The first one regarding FOMO. Yes, there's two sides to that. The first thing is we're living in a world of information. It's growing. It's exponential, growing daily. We cannot think about the amount of information that is out there. But in this case, when we talk about FOMO, it's not limiting to what is out there. It is about an individual approach of your technology. So FOMO is, and you know what FOMO is if you cannot put your phone down for a day. If you cannot say is for today, let's make it Sunday. I'm not going to pick up my phone. I'm not going to look at my emails. I'm not going to answer. I'm not going to read. In this case, FOMO is an addiction to constantly see what's out there. Who texted me? What did they say? What did they say in the WhatsApp group? Who said what about whom? What photo was posted about whom? So it's not about giving correct information to people that they are aware and can make correct decision. This is about an addiction of I cannot leave my devices. And if you cannot go through a weekend without taking your device in your hand, then you probably have it, because we need instant gratification. Who said what, when, about whom, how bad was it, who's fighting with whom. So in this case, FOMO is the ability to say is no, it is 9 o'clock, I must go to bed. A lot of youngsters these days cannot go to bed. They watch their phones through the night and then they get sleep and then they get all the other problems. So try it. This is an open challenge to everybody. Take a day and see if you can get through your day without your device. Don't even charge it. Put it away. If you can't, then you probably need to rethink your strategy. So that's how we see FOMO is. The second one is archiving for the future. Yes, by all means. We have got the ability to show future generations what happened, what we did wrong. But we must remember a lot of people, and we're going back to fake news. There's a lot of fake news. So whose viewpoint is correct? Whose viewpoint should be transferred to the younger generation? And when we do this, we must make sure we have correct news. So if you post something in the idea of this, archive this for future generation, people must know this. Make sure that is correct, that it's not fake news. Because if we keep going and posting fake news, in 10 years' time, people won't know what's fake or not. So yes, we must archive it, but we must also not make fake news about people, situations. We must tell the truth as we would in an ordinary life. The last one is about passwords. I hope I've got this wrong. Yes, password is your key to your house. So, will you walk down the street and give your house keys to anybody that you don't know? No, you won't. So, even if it's your bank account, your online banking, your Facebook account, no matter what, that password is standing between you and somebody that wants to steal your stuff. So, do not click the button on save my password. Do not click the button on remember me. Do not tell anybody your password. Do not write it down. If you're tech savvy, get this a password management system that will save all your passwords. Don't make your password 123451977. So your password is your key to keeping things private. If the system asks you to change it every month. Your password is your protection, your first line of protection. So make sure, don't give it to anybody. Keep it safe, then you will be fine.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'd like to take maybe a few more questions from our audience down here. We are preparing to wrap up. As we do so, if there are more questions, I'm going to ask our team to please create some way where questions can be dropped. And I'd like to ask Charity and Professor Kritzinger, where there are questions that we could not field today, that if we could send those questions to them and they could answer them, and we can then distribute those answers, I think, so that we can get more knowledge from these two topics. Thank you very much, Charity. So I acknowledge Mrs. Mdao, and then let's go over to Skoliwe, and then let's just see how we're doing for time. Thank you.
Oh, good afternoon, Madam Charity. All I'm going to ask is, how can we change the social norms that men are not allowed to cry? Is a man not allowed to be sad enough to cry? And what are the consequences of suppressing such a sadness?
Sure, I think that's an...
I was just wanted to say, can we maybe take two questions and then you can respond to both? Apologies for cutting you.
Thank you so much, Fezeka, for that, because it is a bit similar to what Koliwe just asked. Miss Charity, I wanted to say that we have become a society that is so reactive, you know. A lot of times when you have conversations with people, you can somewhat decipher or tell that the issue here lies with their foundational, their development stages when they were growing up. The damage was done then. So my question is that how do we then help our kids that we are raising now, give them childhoods that they do not have to heal from? How do we, what are the steps we can put in place, or things or actions we can put in place in terms of helping our children develop socially and emotionally so that we don't have issues or they don't have issues in their adulthood?
All right, so I'll respond to the two, I think, very excellent questions. The first one about men not crying. It's such, or men not feeling emotions, and emotions being the space of women or depicting weakness is, it's actually quite sad, because it's what we've ended up with in this country, in our society, with gender-based violence. Because what is seen as being acceptable as a real man, you assert yourself by being aggressive, by being angry, and it's something that is so toxic, because we start from when you're young, when even how you treat children, that if a toddler is a boy and they cry, you're told, no, don't cry because you're a boy. And skip the step of seeing that it's just an emotion, the same way that you wouldn't say, stop laughing because you're a boy. You shouldn't be saying, stop crying because you're a boy. So to answer the question, we are already in a place in our country and in our nation, which is, it's become a crisis, that we are fighting gender-based violence, and we're trying to deal with the consequences of what we've suppressed emotionally and how we have expected men or males to not be human beings first. So the space of emotions, or the language or things of emotions, are about being a human being, not being male or female. And I think that's the first thing where we need to start, that to tackle things like gender-based violence, things that we're fighting so hard, aggression, violence in our society with men, is to start off by humanizing them first. So you're human, and there's way more emotional responses that you can choose from, except for anger and aggression. And it doesn't mean that you're a better man or a less than man if you start crying or expressing feelings that are seen as feminine emotions. So I think the consequences are huge, and we are seeing them. We are unfortunately living through them in this country especially. And the answer about, or just to respond to things that start in childhood, and of course, a lot of the things that we know, a lot of the things that we go through are things that we've seen. I mean, when you think about children or young people that are growing up, a lot of what they do is not what they hear, but what they see, primarily from the homes that they come from. And of course, there are a lot of traumas and a lot of things that our parents who raised us went through, and they did the best that they knew to do with what they had at their disposal. And I think that together, I think even with technology, with the amount of things that we can access and free information, that instead of doom scrolling and spending the whole time liking celebrity pictures of them being at their beach houses and whatever, perhaps to read more sites or go to more things that would be empowering to us, to find out more information. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, just if you Google and go emotional agility, just these two words that I mentioned, there are books on it, there are free PDFs that you can do, there are assessments that you can do online. There's a lot of things that technology, I think the good part of technology that Prof was speaking about. And I think another thing in terms of how do we then equip ourselves for our prospective future children is to look after ourselves and our mental health first. And I always use this analogy of when you're flying on a plane, the instruction they always give you for safety is, before you can assist anyone else, make sure that you are strapped in and that you are safe, and then you can help other people. And I think that's the general information, particularly when it comes to mental health and looking after ourselves, that it's not something you can do without looking after your own. So it's that notion of not being able to pour from an empty cup.
Okay. I'm looking at our time, and we've got about 5 minutes to wrap up. I'm going through questions, and I'm acknowledging the questions that I'm getting from our viewers at home. I see there's a question also coming from YouTube as well. And I think the answers have been touched on, but I think I'm going to just touch on one question. And as I have requested that we're creating a repository where we can get these questions and we'll send them to Charity and Professor so that they can answer, just so that we don't get carried away. I know these are very emotive topics, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from them. So I'm going to just go to the YouTube question. I think you've partially answered it, but let me just state the question. The question says from Benevolence Ramafalo says, where do you draw the line between internet addiction, FOMO, and hunger to learn in such times where students are learning from home and mostly rely on the internet for their learning? And I'll give you Charity an opportunity, then we'll go to Professor. Thank you.
All right, so I'll speak about it just from the psychological side of things, that if internet or the internet serves as a distraction, like how Prof, I think, beautifully explained it, like if you can't test yourself for a weekend to just put your phone down and not constantly, or put whatever device down and not constantly wanting to find out information about whatever, then I think at certain times you need to check whether it's actually serving as a distraction from you facing the reality of what's happening. The reality is not always bad, but it's in small things that there is a very fine line between being hungry for knowledge, wanting to know what's happening, to actually trying to transpose yourself to a reality that is not what is happening. And a lot of times people use technology, use social media especially, to try and distract themselves from feeling emotions that are uncomfortable and finding ways to deal with them. So from a psychological side, you need to check in with yourself about what's happening in your life, what's going on. And oftentimes we find that when you find that you just cannot leave social media, just cannot leave your devices, it oftentimes is about distracting yourself from the reality of what's happening in the moment.
Kritzinga?
Yes, we must also understand that different people will have different viewpoints of technology, how much time they can spend on technology or not. My advice is everything we do, ask yourself, what is the worth of this? Is it worthwhile spending my time? And if you can answer yourself to say, this is for education, I'm learning, I'm improving myself, I'm improving my community. The worth that I get out of that is more than the time spent, then you're fine. If the worth what you get out of it is not, then the warning signs go off. For instance, Facebook. If you're just spending hours looking at pictures of what people have done, what games they are playing, then the worth is very less. Then it's not time spent correctly. So every time we do an action, says, what is the worth? What do I get out of it? How does it improve my life or the life of my community? And if you can't answer yourself, then you have to look at that activity. And what the other thing I say is, if you're unsure, go and speak to your inner circle of friends and family. Ask them, I've done this for this many hours. This is the output. What do you think? And they will tell you the truth. If you spend X amount of time looking at inappropriate material online, everybody will tell you there's no worth in it. So then you have to rethink of what do you do online, and isn't it time to spend your time better with your family, with your friends, learning new skills? So that decision is up to us. If we've got children, that decision is up to the parents at this stage. So every time ask yourself, what is the worth of this time spent on the internet?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. At which point I'd like to hand over to His Grace Archbishop for a few words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vezega. And thanks, Professor Kritzinger, and thank you so much, Charity. I'm not wrapping up, I'm not taking over from you. I just wanted to acknowledge the very useful and meaningful the content shared with us. I just want to comment on the point made by Prof around plagiarism. And I think this is a really crucial point for young people listening in today and watching from wherever, that as part of, so if she talks about cyber ethics, it is something that I think we must take seriously and walk away with today, that as part of growing up, as part of progressing in our careers, one of the things that we are going to have to be mindful of is to remain ethical online and to remain responsible with the content that we are consuming, especially for people going into research and things like that, to always be sure that you are original in your contributions, in your research, and where you are quoting somebody else, that you are crediting the right people. I'm sure we all have heard recently of many stories of people plagiarizing people's ideas and content, be it for research or even for some of the media shows. And I think those things can be quite embarrassing. So I think I want to just put that out there to say, take it seriously. I have a question for Charity, and I think it's linked to cyber presence, but also emotions. And I think one of the opportunities that social media presents for a lot of people is the ability to express themselves on a platform maybe that's a little bit not personal, and therefore for people who might struggle with communication, particularly communicating their emotions, social media is, and by social media, I'm not talking about even Twitter and Instagram, I'm talking like WhatsApp, yeah? And these are platforms that people have now become so used to. I'm sure many of us get messages on a daily basis. Some of the content is quite emotional and the things that you would have preferred somebody to pick up the phone and talk to you about, but people feel more comfortable, you know, expressing themselves on WhatsApp. And you find that in relationships as well, whether it's people that are still courting, or I'm sure some married people might be more comfortable expressing certain things on WhatsApp as opposed to in person. Koliwe mentioned something about men struggling with their emotions. What would you say to a generation that's become so reliant on communicating on these platforms, and some of the social skills that have become quite prized in the past are slowly becoming less valued? How do we take this forward?
I think it's quite a tough thing, because it does create a level of being anonymous and a level of distancing from the emotion. So if someone is in the room with you and letting you know how what you said felt for them, it is a lot more threatening, it does feel a lot more exposing. And I think there is something that might be very tempting to think that that's a better way of expressing. Some people say, I express myself better, and therefore they'll bear all their vulnerabilities on a Facebook status, for instance. But I do think that that does more damage than it does good, because it takes away the opportunity of being able to practice. Because I think people take emotions for granted and emotional health for granted, that it's just something that you can do. And I think it does take also practice, that if I spoke about these things and acceptance and all those things, it doesn't mean that just because you know how to say NASA and you can repeat all these things, then you automatically become an expert at it. And I think it is something that you need to challenge yourself to be able to do. Face-to-face communication is always the best prize, because people end up having a lot of anxiety about things. And it goes back then to emotional agility, that you can avoid feeling uncomfortable. And we are now in a generation, like Prof said, where everything is instant gratification. We don't want to feel uncomfortable. We want things done. We want things done now. And there's a lot of value in being patient. There's a lot of value in feeling a bit of discomfort to get what you want. So I would say that the way forward is to use it as a muscle. The more you exercise the muscle, the better it gets. That it might feel a lot easy. It does feel a lot more comfortable. I think I also do fall into that trap. It feels a lot more comfortable to say things because you feel like if you say it out loud, then your voice will be shaking, that you won't know what to say, you'll mince over your words. But it is about the practice and building that muscle, the muscle of being comfortable with discomfort and not to always avoid, because what we've become as human beings is that we want to avoid feelings of discomfort at any and every cost. And sometimes the cost is just very high.
Thank you, Charity. Thank you very much. At this point, this is where we bring our session to a close. Very sadly, I know there are a lot of questions coming through, but we have more programs, more items in the program that we need to get to. So I'd like to appreciate Charity. Thank you very much for the time. I know we contacted you at such short notice. Thank you so much for coming up, for preparing for us, for being present, and for really tuning into the content so that you could share what you have today. There's so many takeaways, I don't even know where to start. But I think from maybe let me talk about what I take away is that feelings, and I love the analogy about a ball because it's something that we use when we're playing in the pool. And the more you push it down, the more it wants to come up. And basically for taking away that I need to check myself. When am I pressing it down? And I think we do it subconsciously. Like you said, we get told that, don't be so emotional. But thank you for all the nuggets that you shared with us. Thank you. Professor Kritzinger, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so very much. We started behind schedule, and you bore with us. Sorry, I think the English escapes me now, so whichever it is. But thank you very, very, very much for preparing for us. Thank you for all the content you shared. Thank you for all the wisdom. And like I said, I would ask very humbly that there's many questions that I've got that we couldn't put out today. If we can please email it to you, and you could please then just respond to us and we'll share with everybody. Is that okay with you?
100%. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening. Thank you so much. So I'm not going to cue to any music. I'm going to go straight into announcements so that we can take a break and come back for the rest of the program. But before I do that, I think it is very appropriate that we give a round of applause for all our participants today. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to switch and toggle between. Okay, I'm just getting the announcements that were shared. Okay. So we're going to go into break now to be back at 10 to 6 as we have a well-renowned international speaker. We have Spirit, who's with us. I think the programs have been shared, so I think people even at home can read the short bio. I won't go into it now. We don't have enough time. But you don't want to miss this. So, and even with the people that are here with us, please don't rush to go home because you might still be driving when Spirit comes on. As I said, she's a renowned speaker. She's going to be speaking on youth and relationships. She speaks on many shows like the Steve Harvey Show. So I think you don't want to miss this one. With that, my other announcement is that there is still some food available for those who were not satisfied at the first round. You will be able to go up again and get something else. But like I'd like to reiterate that we'd like to be seated back here at 10 to 6 to ensure that at 6 o'clock when we connect to Spirit that everybody's seated and we're ready to receive her. I'm going to request that the congregations remain seated as we allow the clergy to move up, and once they are in their relevant respective area, we can then disperse and go on a break. Thank you very much.